Podcast news. I wanted to share that Marc Maron, one of the podcast OGs, one of the podcast goats, is going to end the WTF podcast. After 16 plus years and 1,600 plus episodes. Yes, I said that correctly, 1,600 plus episodes. He announced recently on a recent episode and got picked up by media and is on a bunch of headlines and articles, a couple of which I will link to in the episode notes in case you guys want to check them out in their entirety. But he announced that he was going to end the show and just being burnt out while also being completely satisfied with the work that he's done over the years. Personally, I think he will come back after some R&R. He even mentioned that, it doesn't mean it's the last time he's going to be on a podcast, or maybe he in the future might redo some sort of like interview style show. So personally, I do think that he'll come back in the future, but if he doesn't, obviously to each their own, and I hope he does get the rest and relaxation that he may be looking for. And Maron started his podcast back in 2009, according to a Guardian article, after his radio show, which was on Air America, had been canceled. And he actually wound up using the studio of that radio show to record his very first episode of the WTF pod, which he went on, obviously, to put out and then continue for his 16-year run. And he wound up building his own studio in his garage, famously, where his podcast studio is to this day. And he's definitely an OG in space. He's one of the pioneers in podcasting. When I think about the podcasting OGs, I think of Rogan, I think of Marc Maron, and I think of Adam Carolla, all of which started around that same time in 2009. And although there's like this bitter angst to Maron, at least that's how he's always like come off to me, like personality wise, I always liked his interview style and his perspective in interviews. They're very intimate and conversational, and he would always lean introspective, which I appreciate. He was also the first podcaster to have a sitting president on a podcast. He had Obama back in the day, which literally went to his garage, again, where he has his podcast. And that just gave, I remember at the time, a sitting president going on a podcast was just like, put like the stamp of legitimacy approval on podcasts, which was then still like this little niche weird thing that nobody listened to. Or not nobody, but that only like cult followers listened to. So that was like really dope, and it was a great episode. More recently, Mo Amer was on, which I spoke about earlier, and I actually featured as my podcast of the week in my newsletter, where I've featured in the past a bunch of different WTF episodes, notably Ron Howard's episode, Pete Davidson's episode, Ta-Nehisi Coates, and a bunch more. And if you're listening and thinking, hey, that sounds like a dope newsletter with great podcast recommendations, where can I get that? And then you can subscribe to my free newsletter at spuntoday.com/subscribe. Ryan Coogler was actually on as well, but I actually haven't heard that episode yet, so I'm definitely going to go check that one out. But yeah, he's going to air the final episode, he says, sometime this fall, this year, 2025, so I have a few more months of new episodes and a shitload of back catalog that fans can definitely listen to in the future. But shout out to Marc Maron and the WTF podcast, definitely one of the GOATs.